From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. I am Ken Davis, welcoming you to another week of discussion about things we care about that have to do with Chicago and the environs. The 19th day of Chicago's coldest April in 130 years. Welcome to Chicago. And the day we're learning that Carson's is closing all its department stores, putting another, something like 23,000 people out of work. And 22 of those stores are right here in Chicago. And also in the news, we had some pretty historic political news yesterday as the Cook County Democratic Party elected its first woman as chairman. It's a pretty remarkable win considering the trouble Toni Preckwinkle was in just a few months ago for the soda tax that she was pushing. But the new boss has got some big problems to solve in her party if the woman who supported Joe Barrios for assessor now wants to portray herself as a progressive. We're going to talk about that for a few minutes on the show today. But our main focus today is housing. We all seem to understand that the cost of housing is rising quickly in Chicago, maybe not like New York or San Francisco, but the need for affordable housing in these parts is getting more and more critical by the day. And here's an interesting statistic for you. Did you know between 2007 and 2015, not one single unit of designated affordable housing was built in 57 of the 77 officially defined community areas in Chicago? Say that again. There are 77 community areas, 55 of them, not one. And a big part of that, today's guest will argue, I think, is aldermanic prerogative. Remember the movie Network? The anchor is Howard Beale, right? And he's saying things on the air that his bosses don't like. So he gets ushered into this frightening room where the biggest guy of the biggest guys walks into the head of the table and he yells one of the greatest lines in movie history. He says, "You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and you will atone." Well, there's a developer out there now who thinks aldermanic prerogative is a big problem, and they're going to see if they can get the courts to overturn the prerogative. It's almost impossible to imagine a city council where the aldermen don't get final say on everything that gets built or developed in their ward, but that's what Maya Dugmosova from The Reader, who wrote recently about this, where she covers housing and criminal justice, was talking about only just recently. Maya, welcome.
Thank you.
To Chicago Newsroom. It's always great to have you here and glad to have you back.
Thanks for having me back.
We've got so many housing things to talk about today, but I really just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about this Toni Preckwinkle thing. Is it just another incremental move forward, or is it really a significant jump for Chicago?
Well, to me, what's most interesting about it is that she had the support for party chairmanship from seemingly everybody, from the most sort of lefty progressive alderman in the city council, Carlos Rosa, to Ed Burke, an old machine stalwart. So I think it's significant that she's considered to be the appropriate and correct party leader by such a wide swath of Democrats in the city. I mean, I think she's sort of honed a reputation as a progressive, but she's also got, I think she's kind of known for a rather unilateral and maybe abrasive leadership style. So I think it'll be interesting to see how kind of being in a position of even more consolidated power will affect her. I think she definitely tends to approach issues with the idea of like, either, you're getting behind me on this, or you're not, and that's too bad for you. Like, she doesn't do a whole lot to, I feel like, really bring people around to her position. As was the case with the soda tax. I mean, it seemed like that there wasn't a whole lot of effort put into really convincing people that it was the right thing to do, whether for revenue reasons or public health reasons. But at the end of the day, despite the debacle, like, her political career seems to be pretty much unscathed.
I would say, yeah.
So people appreciate her leadership, and Chicago loves people that they can say they get things done about. So she's definitely one of those people.
But also, she she has been a kind of a progressive leader on things like social justice and criminal law, all those kinds of things about trying to reduce the amount of time in county jail and those sorts of issues, which have really put her at odds with the police community and a number of other more conservative forces who think that that's the wrong way to go. So she has taken some very strong principled stands, I would say.
Right, it's true, and it's kind of her stands don't necessarily connect to the ability to do anything about those issues, because at the end of the day, she reforming the criminal justice system through, whether it's the courts or the jail or the state's attorney's office, like these are separately siloed offices led by separately elected officials. So she's definitely honed a reputation as a progressive, but also within the purview of her office, there's not a whole ton she can do to change the way these criminal justice actors operate. As the head of the Cook County Democrats, I think she's gonna be more potentially influential with pushing a more progressive, criminal justice agenda, like, when they slate judges, when they slate candidates for other offices. So I think that if one believes in her mission as a progressive, this is going to be an opportunity for her to push that agenda in more concrete ways.
I think it's been interesting to watch her with the hospitals, the Cook County hospital system. There was a push by a couple of members of the county board to sell the debt, if you recall, on there was some $90 million or something that doesn't get collected every year, but it doesn't get collected because its service is being provided to indigent patients. And there was a move, and I guess it did happen, and some of that debt was sold, and the public radio show Marketplace did a piece on it the other night, a national piece about the people who are being harassed by debt collectors now who have no money, who went to Cook County Hospital for respiratory surgery, or not surgery, but treatment or something. And now they're being dinged for, a $500 bill, and they're being called every 15 minutes by commercial debt collectors. These are the kinds of issues that I've always kind of thought that Toni Preckwinkle has taken a very principled stand on. So it's just going to be interesting to see when you mix that with being the raw brass knuckles political guy who's got to get out there and herd the cats. So it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah.
I know we both have been people who've been watching this for a long time, and it's just a really fascinating development to me. But the more important thing, well, not more important, but the reason that we asked you here was to talk today about so many of the housing issues that are boiling up around us. And I was just completely spellbound by your piece about the 8535 West Higgins building, which we should put this in some perspective. It's on Higgins Road, just west of Cumberland. It's right out by the airport in that little stretch of Chicago that kind of hugs the airport. A really good place to build housing for transient people. Transient might not be the right people, but singles and small apartments, because it's literally across the Kennedy Expressway from the Blue Line. So paint the picture.
Yeah, so this is, if folks can imagine driving out to the airport, passing the Cumberland Blue Line stop in the middle of the highway. On the left, you've got those like strange series of office buildings that are all sort of triangular and with tinted windows. There's sort of like this phalanx of them. And on the right side, there's you can see a Marriott hotel. And so this parcel of land has been next to the Marriott Hotel across the highway from the Cumberland Blue Line, has been vacant for something like 30 years now. And since at least 2015 or 2016, there have been plans to redevelop the area to build several new office buildings and an apartment building in that space. So originally the plan had been only to build office buildings, but as the company that used to own that piece of land began figuring out how to plan the site, I guess they did some surveys and found out that a lot of the local employers there and people in the community were saying that we really need more workforce housing there for people who work in the office parks in the area, and also for folks that work at the airport. So, people who might work for the airlines who come in and out of town. So this would be an ideal place to build some of those apartment units. So in 2016, the alderman in the 41st Ward, which is where this parcel of land is located, Alderman Anthony Napolitano wrote a letter to the Department of Planning and Development expressing his support for the idea of building a couple of office buildings and an apartment building on the plot. Shortly after that, the parcel of land was actually purchased by another developer named Glenstar. So this company now owns this land. And so Glenstar intended to proceed with the plan that had been kind of figured out by their predecessor and supported by the alderman of building a couple of office buildings and an apartment building on the site. The only difference was that whereas the first developer had planned a maybe like 230 unit apartment building, Glenstar wanted to make it a nearly 300 unit apartment building. So slightly increased in size, but in order to fit more studios and more small apartments. And they kind of conceptualized this as a luxury, like micro studio, micro apartments for a young, well-to-do renter clientele.
Not too much unlike what we've seen along the Blue Line further south, along Milwaukee Avenue, kind of a transit-oriented development.
Right, and it's a transit-oriented development, but Glenstar is like a luxury developer, so their whole plan had just been to build an apartment building in an area where there's a lot of interest in that kind of thing that would be marketable to kind of a more upscale crowd of young people who might not have families.
Yeah.
But there were a few two-bedroom units and maybe a couple of three-bedroom units also planned for the site. No, I think it was it was only studios, one bedrooms, and two bedrooms. So 2016, Glenstar comes in, the alderman expresses to them that he's still in support of the idea. They just need to get approval from his zoning advisory council, which a lot of words, kinds of organizations, group of folks who are aldermen on development and rezoning and planning decisions in the ward. So in the fall and early winter of 2016, in December, Glenstar began to do presentations for the 41st Ward Zoning Advisory Council, explaining what they were planning to do, what the units would be, how big the building would be, all of these details of the proposal. And in early January of 2017, the Zoning Advisory Council voted unanimously with one abstention to support this development. Glenstar says that after
that's
that...
That's significant. I mean, that's a significant moment.
Right. So, and there was no
because you don't always get unanimous votes at these zoning advisory boards.
Yeah. So it is significant. There was nobody had come out to these hearings to express an opposition to this. Nobody on the Zoning Advisory Council seemed particularly skeptical of this proposal. And so after their approval, Glenstar says that they once again received confirmation from Alderman Napolitano that he was in support of the development, that they could move forward. And so essentially what happens after that, this entire process with like getting the alderman's approval and the approval of the Zoning Advisory Council is like a completely informal thing. Based on the city code, this is not something that's required to actually build a building.
It's not in the Constitution or anything.
Of the city,
the framers of the Constitution did not.
It's definitely not in the Constitution, and it's not even in the law as it's articulated for the city on what you have to do in order to build something in the city.
It's a tradition.
It's a tradition, and it's understood to be something that you really need because you need the local alderman's support for him to advocate for your proposal for the entire city council when they eventually vote on it. So Glenstar, being a well-established player in the city, they've done a lot of developments. They knew this whole thing. So they knew that this was the process. They complied with it as expected. So after they got this approval from the local alderman, the process is that you need to the parcel had already been zoned for the 3 office buildings. They needed a change in the zoning to accommodate the apartment building. And this is what
Would this have replaced one of the office buildings now?
right. So the initial,
So it'd be two in one.
the Glen Star's predecessor owner of that land had initially wanted to do 3 office buildings. Then they did all those surveys to figure out that they really should do 2 office buildings and an apartment building. Then Glen Star took over, proceeded with the same plan, but still you needed a zoning change to accommodate the apartment building. So they submitted applications to the Department of Planning and Development. They had done a bunch of studies that they also presented to the local zoning advisory council that showed that the apartment building would not significantly impact traffic or the local schools. And all of all this information was sent off to the Department of Planning and Development. The DPD approved and gave their support to this plan.
Is there a document to prove that?
Yes.
There is,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
This
So
wasn't
the-
this wasn't informal.
Right.
This was formal.
This is an official thing that the DPD submits to the City Council's Plan Commission, which then has to vote on this. And after the Plan Commission approves it, if they approve it, the proposal then has to go to the Zoning Committee. And once the Zoning Committee approves it, it goes to the full City Council in order to get a full City Council vote, and then it can proceed if it does.
But that's perfunctory.
No, that's the actual process.
but I'm saying the city council thing at the end is just perfunctory. It gets thrown into the omnibus, generally speaking. and-
Basically, yeah,
Yeah.
right. So having gone through all of those informal steps to get local approval, the developer went on to follow point by point the actual law, the actual rules for getting an amendment to the zoning. And however, in the
This is
spring,
where it gets interesting.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. So in the spring of 2017, in nearby Jefferson Park, there's this building that was being proposed for 5150 Northwest Highway.
Right across the street from the police station, the
And-
Jefferson Park
right,
Police Station.
And nearby the Jefferson Park Blue Line. So this is in the 45th Ward, in Alderman John Arena's ward. This building gets proposed. It was 100 units of affordable housing. The entire building was going to be affordable housing. So very different from Glen Star's micro luxury apartment building. 100 units of affordable housing, a lot of it prioritizing veteran applicants, a lot of it fully ADA accessible for people with wheelchairs. And when this proposal gets rolled out, there's a huge community backlash of people in Jefferson Park basically saying that like Alderman Arena is trying to force CHA public housing down their throats. There was all kinds of like
Cabrini Green started
Right.
as a veterans or something.
Exactly. There was
some-
very thinly veiled racist rhetoric all around this that after all the bad press was shown to the folks that were leading these protests, they quickly changed the basis for their opposition to like density issues. They said the building was too tall for the area, that it was too big, that it didn't fit in with the kind of scope of development in the community. But there was this huge backlash, and Alderman Napolitano, though this wasn't happening in his ward, came out strongly early on to say, like John Arena, like the locals, your local constituents don't want this building. I stand with them. Like you should listen to your constituents and support what they want.
So this is interesting, if I can interrupt.
Yeah.
We have this, as we said at the beginning, we have this age-old thing of aldermanic prerogative. So the alderman can listen to whoever he wants to listen to and decide yes, no. It's binary.
Right.
We're going to do it. John Arena had decided yes on this building. So that was his aldermanic prerogative, and
Right.
it should have gone forward.
Right, and Napolitano intervened, and he didn't intervene in an official capacity,
Right.
but in a symbolic one. He came out to talk to the cameras. He was at the protest the very first night that there was a protest associated with that affordable housing building. So he kind of meddled in a neighboring ward. A lot of people thought for sort of political purposes, because Napolitano is Chicago's only Republican alderman. He has a kind of a base of folks who
Are Trump people.
Right. So the
I'll
Venn
say it.
diagram between
Yeah.
Napolitano's
a lot of
voters.
Trump supporters in the
Right.
41st Ward. Yeah.
Whereas John Arena is this sort of, self-styled progressive. He wasn't kind of bowing down to the pressure of the people who were against the building, who showed up at that contentious meeting in February of 2017. So anyway, so Napolitano meddles in his neighboring wards, even if symbolically. development idea. And shortly after that, maybe like within a month, he continues to speak up against this development and saying that Arena needs to listen to his constituents. So John Arena emailed, and this came out through FOIAs much later, that I then got a hold of. So John Arena emailed Anthony Napolitano to tell him that he was being a hypocrite about opposing this proposed 100-unit building in his ward, in the 45th ward, because in the meantime, there's this 300-unit building that was planned for Napolitano's ward, and why are you standing here telling me that this building is out of character with my community when you've got a building 3 times that size going up, right nearby? And Napolitano responded to him that actually this is nothing like what's being forced into Jefferson Park, because these are luxury micro units located in a parcel where you would expect to see density. Next to a highway.
Right next to a highway, yeah.
Right.
Next to a railroad.
Right. So then in the ensuing months, so that was in March of 2017, Glenstar, still proceeding with all of the applications and everything that they need to do to get official approval to build this apartment building. Suddenly, by June of 2017, Napolitano starts contacting DPD, the Department of Planning and Development, to say that he is against a proposal that Glenstar wants to build this 300-unit building, and that they shouldn't approve this, it shouldn't go to the Plan Commission, that he wants the discussion about this to be deferred indefinitely.
Did something change?
Well, the thing that changed...
Did something in the plan of the building change?
Nothing in the plan of the building changed. Napolitano has justified his change of heart about the proposal in the following way. He said that in the spring of 2017, a lot of people on the Northwest Side made it clear that they did not want high-density buildings in their community. And so because this was a high-density building, he was no longer supporting it. So he tried to stall the process and prevent a vote in the Plan Commission. He did not succeed because a local alderman has no sway over, a local alderman cannot stop a vote in the Plan Commission over a development decision. Only the only person that can ask for kind of a slowdown of the process is the applicant, is the developer. So the developer initially agreed to to kind of stall their hearing by a month, but in July 2017, the Plan Commission votes, they fully approve the building, except for one person, and Napolitano is there saying that he doesn't want this building built. And one member of the Plan Commission, Alderman Tom Tunney, says that he is not in support of the building and he won't vote for it with respect to, because he wants to be respectful of Napolitano's
prerogative.
Right, disagreeing with this idea, but also, he says, because there isn't enough affordable housing planned on site.
Okay, now this is where we have to put a bookmark and we have to go back.
Right.
Because this building has affordable housing units in it, this
Right.
luxury building.
Right. So the ARO, the Chicago Affordable Requirements Ordinance, says that if you're developing a residential building of a certain size, you have to set aside 10% of the units
Right.
on site as affordable housing, or pay an in lieu fee. So as we know, as you mentioned that statistic, that came from the OIG's office. Between 2007 and 2015, 57 of 77 community areas saw no new affordable housing buildings. That's not because they didn't see any new development.
Right,
That's
right.
because developers usually prefer just to pay the
Just
fee.
pay the fee and get out.
Right.
Right.
This developer had planned a handful of affordable housing units on site and had planned to pay the fee for the rest of them. They were supposed to have 30 units because it was a 300-unit building. So I think initially they were going to put 7 affordable units on site and pay the fee for the rest. But after
Oh, you mean they weren't going to do the full 30 that they were
in the
required
beginning,
to
no.
do?
But
Okay.
after Tom Tunney came out and said, I want to see more affordable
I see.
housing, and
Okay.
explain his opposition to the proposal on that basis,
Yeah.
that was one important factor. And number two, a lot of community organizations who were supporting affordable housing on the Northwest Side at that time were contacting Glenstar and also asking for more affordable housing units on site. So after both of those things happened, Glenstar committed to putting all 30 units
I see. Okay.
on site.
All right. So Glenstar says, we're going to build this building in accordance with the law of the city of Chicago.
Right.
We're going to do what the aspiration of this city calls for.
Right, with the letter and the spirit of the law.
Right.
They're going to fully comply, right? And so then the next step that they were supposed to go through was this zoning committee approval. And the zoning committee approval, the meeting was called for September 11th or September 9th. Anyway, early September of 2017. Between the Plan Commission approval and the zoning committee approval, Alderman Napolitano and his staff is like emailing people on the zoning committee, emailing DPD, expressing their discontent that the Plan Commission hearing was even held and there was a vote.
But they are not objecting because it's got ARO in it. It's got these apartments in it,
No,
right?
not yet. And presumably, at the time, Napolitano knew that there were at least 7 units of affordable housing going into the unit, because that had been in the
Heavens.
proposal before.
Oh my goodness, seven affordable apartments in 300.
Right, but
What
he's
will
not.
we do?
But every time that he emails, for example, somebody at DPD or somebody on the zoning committee to ask for the zoning committee to stall, to like not have a hearing, to defer the matter indefinitely, he's not saying here's why. He's just saying I want the so the understanding of aldermanic prerogative is so kind of pervasive. It's almost as if he doesn't really need to provide a well-defined reason for why he's opposed. He's the alderman, he's opposed, and he's asking his colleagues on the zoning committee to
Respect it.
Right, to respect it and to not have a vote on this. So the September zoning committee hearing rolls around. Glenn Starr actually now says that they were told the day of the hearing that they had to come. So they did not know that the hearing was coming on that day. They had almost no time to prepare. So they have to show up with their lawyers. Alderman Napolitano shows up as well. And very early on in the hearing, he expresses his opposition to this proposal. He says he doesn't want to see this in his ward. And Alderman Solis, who's the chairman of the zoning committee, calls a recess. And he asks all the members of the zoning committee and Alderman Napolitano to go off the record and out of the room, and essentially takes the meeting off the record, and something is discussed for like 15 minutes behind closed doors. Glenn Starr doesn't know what it is, the public doesn't know what it is, it's not in the transcripts of the hearing, of the meeting. They come back 15 minutes later, the session is called back into order, and the aldermen on the zoning committee move to defer discussion of this proposal. And it's not put back on the zoning committee schedule
But it's
ever
not
again.
It's not killed.
It's not killed.
They didn't
just
send it to the rules committee
They
or
didn't.
something.
No, they just deferred discussion and didn't have a vote on it.
Wow.
And so what that meant was that by January of 2018 of this year, the Plan Commission approval expired. Because the Plan Commission, once they approve a development proposal,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
it has to go to the zoning committee and be voted on by the full city council within 6 months. And this didn't happen. The zoning committee stalled. It didn't have a vote, and therefore it didn't have a vote in city council. So by the mid-January, it's like Glenn Starr would have to go back to square one to get all of those DPD approvals and Plan Commission approvals again. And essentially, this is like
But they wouldn't get
tantamount-
past the alderman because the alderman wouldn't approve it in the first place.
Well, and it's just they'd already expended like $300,000 on this process.
Yeah.
So as of March 20th, the developer has sued the city for a variety of violations of its own code, of how development proposals are supposed to be approved, for violations of the Open Meetings Act by the zoning committee. Because
Meaning that they went out of the room and had this
And had a
private meeting
discussion-
and there's no record of that meeting.
Right, and had a discussion and apparently invited the local alderman to participate in that discussion and influence that, even though the local alderman by city code has no sway, is not supposed to have any sway over these decisions. And this is the most interesting part of this lawsuit. They are asking a judge to declare that the custom of aldermanic prerogative is unlawful, that making zoning decisions in this way is actually unlawful. And so this is a this could have major this could have like major ramifications for the city and how development is planned around the city.
It could have major ramifications for everything going forward, because if you think about it, almost everything that happens in the city council in some way or another comes back to aldermanic
Right,
prerogative.
and it's and if you ever told, Chicago is very unique in this way, in the amount of control that local aldermen have over development decisions. It's very hard to have a citywide development policy
Right.
or planning goal.
Well, this right now, we just arrived at the crux of this whole conversation, because as I'm quoting you back here, but aldermen in Chicago have jurisdiction over approximately 54,000 constituents.
Mm-hmm.
New York City, 166,000. Los Angeles, 264,000. Their councils are smaller and they have a larger geography. We've always debated that in Chicago. It's been an issue here for as long as any of us can remember. Should we have a smaller city council? Would it be more effective? Would it be more efficient? And the arguments are always no. Our aldermen carry more responsibility for fewer people. Therefore, they're closer to the ground. They're reflecting what the people want. But when you come to these citywide policy things, like the city says we want 10% of our new development to have affordable housing in it,
Right.
that's where the rubber meets the road. And the aldermen can just completely derail these policies.
Right, and it's kind of a strange thing to argue about, because in so many ways we in our society are always talking about how more democracy is a good thing, how more representation, more possibilities for individuals to connect with their elected officials is good. And so arguing against this, I think, puts you at risk of being accused of somehow being like anti-democracy, right? But the truth is that there are plenty of places in the United States where where the process isn't so, where there aren't so many units of local government participating in making these decisions, and it's actually not even the way that this is supposed to happen here. Like, there's no city law that says that this is the way we're supposed to run things. This is a political tradition. Mm-hmm. So I think that, and what's really funny is that even as this lawsuit is going on, as Glen Starr is bringing this lawsuit against the city, there is a simultaneous lawsuit right now against the city by a resident of Jefferson Park, John Arena's ward, who is suing the city and accusing John Arena of misusing his aldermanic prerogative because he did not sufficiently, because the person suing is saying that John Arena did not respect the voice of the community enough and proceeded to push forward on a proposal, not on the affordable housing building, but another proposal on Lips Avenue near the Jefferson Park Blue Line stop. So this person is saying, in effect, like, John Arena is not sufficiently listening to his constituents.
He's not using his aldermanic prerogative properly. He's not using it the way I want him to use it, therefore.
Right, like the argument is that, aldermanic prerogative is supposed to be used to express the will of the community, and this person is claiming that by supporting the development, John Arena is going against a significant portion of the community and what they want. Mm-hmm. So I think that, like, before we get all too excited about Glen Starr's lawsuit and the possibility, the effect it might have on the city, I think it is important to acknowledge that Glen Starr is not like a civil rights crusader.
That's exactly right.
They're not an affordable housing
crusader.
They're a
commercial developer.
They're a commercial developer, and their number one goal is to build their building and make sure that the $300,000 they sink into this process don't go to waste. Yeah. So if the city is willing to settle, I'm sure that they would. Mm-hmm. I'd be very surprised if they didn't go for a settlement deal, and I think it's very likely that the city will just settle with them.
Oh, just give them the $300K and say that's it, just go away?
Maybe not even that. I mean, I would imagine that a situation that could happen is that the city will say, okay, we'll give you your hearings. We'll give you your zoning hearing. We'll give you your city council hearing. We'll give you your votes if you promise to just drop this lawsuit. And I think that given that this developer just wants to build their building, they would go for that kind of deal.
Do you think they would get it through the council? Would they get it through the council with Napolitano standing up there saying, I forbid you to vote for this?
I bet they would, because I'm sure that the city would do some preparatory work with the aldermen and make it understood.
Oh, you mean the preparatory
So,
work?
so
yeah.
I mean, look, because at the end of the day, not settling, fighting this lawsuit for the city would mean that the mayor, that
Right.
the city, central city apparatus, that the executive branch of the city
Yeah.
is fighting a battle that Napolitano started
Right.
in his ward
Right.
over his, for his political reasons.
Right.
Napolitano is not someone who has, I think, a lot of sway with the mayor. I don't think that the city
Right.
would want to expend tens of thousands of dollars fighting a lawsuit on his behalf.
All the more reason why this is so amusing, because he's not one of the favorites. He's the only Republican in the council. He's
a young alderman.
He's a young alderman.
Yeah.
He's kind of an outsider.
Yeah.
And he screwed up. I mean, maybe Ed Burke can pull off being in favor of something until he's not in favor of something. Maybe there are some examples of that having happened in the past. But to do it in such a high-profile way, it just embarrasses everybody, and
Right.
it jeopardizes the primal forces.
Right. And I think that like the Glenn Starr's argument in their complaint is that like either aldermanic prerogative is a thing,
Yeah.
and we honor this custom,
Right.
and this is how it works.
Right.
You can't like flip flop midway.
Right,
if you're
right.
if you're saying you're for it, or that it has to be declared unlawful
Right,
because like
right.
it's just this arbitrary thing that doesn't follow any kind of rules or guidelines.
There was a great quote in your story. I believe it was an attorney for Glenn Starr, if I'm not mistaken, who said that, it's not really about aldermanic prerogative. The aldermen have always used it well.
Right, which is
but
an
not
interesting.
this time.
Yeah, it's an interesting quote. People, I think, were tickled by that
Yeah.
because I mean, nobody who's lived in Chicago for any significant amount of time believed that aldermen
Right.
have used aldermanic
Yeah,
prerogative
yeah, yeah.
responsibly. But this is a lawyer for a large luxury developer
Yeah,
with myriad
yeah.
connections with the city and
Right.
who relies on good relationships with the city.
It's just such a fascinating story. It's a boring little story about an apartment building that
Mm-hmm.
actually just suddenly mushroomed into this atomic issue. And I noticed from the local Natick papers that 5150 Northwest Highway is still alive.
Yeah.
There's talking about changing that building around a little bit and
Right.
modifying it.
There's still there. So the new modified proposal that the affordable housing developer is proposing for that building would be like 75 units instead of 100, fewer 3-bedroom units, more of the units guaranteed for veterans rather than just preferred. So they're still massaging the proposal. The last conversation I had with John Arena a few weeks ago was that there's definitely like it could take years to get the necessary funding from the city to build the affordable housing development. So it's still alive and in play, and it's not so unusual that it's such a long process to secure the funding that they need
Meanwhile,
for
they
it.
have demolished the building that was there, so it's just an open
Well,
piece
the
of
storage
property now.
facility,
Yeah.
this is like a whole other part
Yeah.
of this, is that there's a storage facility that has to be built first, and that is going ahead.
Yeah. It's always interesting in Chicago. I want to just talk about a couple of other quick stories. I can't believe that we're 40 minutes into the show already.
Talking about
I thought we were
aldermanic
going to talk about
prerogative.
this for
Yeah.
10 minutes. You wrote an interesting piece about Atrium Village. I think we have an image of it. It's everybody probably knows it. It's at Clybourne and Division, that kind of middle-rise building that's been there since 1979. It was all completely redeveloped, and there was talk of it being almost kind of a utopian thing where they were going to build some luxury high-rises, but they were going to scatter lower-income people all through the development. And now that's all.
Yeah, so
That's out the
that's a very kind of less unexpected story, I would say, in terms of like what luxury developers do in the city. So that building, the conditions of this Canadian multinational developer, Ani, the conditions of the purchase were that they were like it's like part of the, I guess, deed agreement, is that they had to preserve all of the affordable housing units that were already part of Atrium Village. It was all affordable housing. They had to preserve all of those units, and they also, there was another deal with HUD, which funded some of those affordable units, that like there were basically two commitments. There were commitments that the developer made as part of the purchase, and there were commitments that were made as part of the because of the funding for this whole thing. And
We
so
should point out that this piece of property just sits right between the Gold Coast and former Cabrini Green.
right, yeah, it's right near Seward Park.
For decades, it was the buffer between them.
Right, people talk about it that way. I mean, it's sort of also, I've heard it discussed as sort of this ideal situation in which you have subsidized housing,
Yeah.
but it wasn't sort of, didn't have the kind of problems that fully city-run public housing did. So anyway, so this, the plan had been, as you described, to build up a bunch of luxury apartment buildings there, like towers, and scatter all the units throughout. So what's happened over the last year is that the developer has decided to, instead of going ahead with that plan, they're keeping the old mid-rise that you mentioned, which is like a 9-story building with 200 some apartment units. They're going to keep that and keep those units as affordable housing, and they're going to build the first of their 3 luxury apartment buildings and not put any affordable housing in it. And they're saying that the second and third apartment building that they're going to build further down the line, that will have the remaining
Trust
of
us.
their, yeah.
Oh, trust us. We'll do it later.
So the interesting thing is that the mortgage on that mid-rise building is completely paid out. So keeping it as affordable housing means that they're not tying up one of their luxury units
Right.
with affordable rents. So it seems like it's a decision that has to do with like what's the most profitable route. But on top of essentially creating a segregated situation, which is like in contravention to the Affordable Requirements Ordinance.
Goes
Like
against the whole idea.
Right, you're supposed to spread the units out throughout the development. In addition to segregating those folks in that old building, they also said that they're not going to let people who live in that little mid-rise use the amenities in the luxury tower. So if they build like pools or gyms or whatever, the people that live in the mid-rise are not part of that community in that way.
And they said that it was because of security concerns?
Right. They
Is
actually,
that's
yeah.
what they actually said?
Yes.
So we can't let these people in wheelchairs and people who are veterans and people who are low-income people use the facilities just across the courtyard because it would be a security
Right. I
concern.
believe that one of the tenants at the Egg Village now, who's one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit that they filed against the developer, the way she described it was that the developer said that they couldn't, having people from the mid-rise use amenities in the luxury building would create a situation which they wouldn't be able to have enough eyes or enough people supervising these tenants. So it's, yeah.
You have a great beat. You really do. It's just some of the things that you have to deal with. Can we do 1 minute on? I just did it again. I can't believe it.
Lathrop Homes?
Lathrop Homes, thank
Yeah.
you. I've always had a block for that name for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, Lathrop Homes. It looks to me, drove by there the other day, the construction is everywhere. It looks like they haven't torn too many buildings down. They're rehabbing the buildings. And it looks like there's a call for tenants. So is this a win?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, it's not a win in terms of preserving affordable housing in a very rapidly gentrifying neighborhood on the north side, because at the end of the day, there's going to be fewer public housing units on the redeveloped site than there were in Lathrop originally. The CHA has made a commitment, a promise that they were going to, the units that were going to be lost on site, the public housing units that were going, the number by which the public housing units were going to be reduced, were going to be made up for elsewhere on the north side through, whether it's project-based developments or other deals that would guarantee affordability or at a public housing rate for some time. But as far as I know, there's not been any concrete, like those units still need to be found or created, or the deals need to be struck with landlords. So it's.
So once again, it comes down to a government agency saying, "Trust us, we're going to do this."
Well, I don't want to, that's kind of saying like the government agency couldn't do it right. It's more, this is a political situation in the city. I mean, the city in early 2000s had committed to rehabbing Lathrop completely
Yes.
and making it a completely public housing development, just rehab, just like, I don't know, the Dearborn homes.
Right.
And this land has quickly accrued value in the meantime, and so they
It
kind
butts
of
right up onto Sterling Bay.
right. So
Yeah.
and now the mayor has just announced this huge continued redevelopment of the North Branch of the Chicago River, and this is right there.
Yeah.
So I know that they're planning to have all kinds of like boat landing kind of stations and docks coming off of the Lathrop property into the water. So they have big plans for that property, and yeah.
So we shall see.
Yeah.
So we shall see. There's one more thing I wanted to kind of like move around with you on, which is this thing about the No Cop Academy. You've written about that. It's not housing per se, but we've had Lori Lightfoot on the show a number of times, and she has herself said that she's not a fan of building the police academy out on the west side, out on like Chicago and Pulaski, for a number of reasons. But you've actually documented the people who kind of created the No Cop Academy hashtag, and
Right.
and they're a group of pretty devoted people who are really working very hard to stop that. Can you explain what I guess I'm trying to say is we've also done a lot of conversation here about the DOJ report and the Police Accountability Task Force report, and both of them, throughout these reports, it's just interlaced with issues about training, police training, and how police training is inadequate, the facilities at which the training is done is inadequate, and that there is need for some kind of new coordinated thing,
So
police and fire together and all that.
actually, I'm going to push back a little bit on
Good,
that
please.
because while the reports are interlaced with commentary about how inadequate the training is, commentary about the inadequacy of the current facilities is actually much more scarce. And so out of the like 99 recommendations that the DOJ put forth in terms of changes that need to be made within CPD, only I think one of them had anything specifically to do with the physical facilities.
Well, I'll push back at you on that and say that sometimes these things are just simply implied. I'll agree with you that in black and white writing, it makes a recommendation for a facility at one point. But the implication is that the training is inadequate in very large part because there aren't adequate facilities in which to do the training.
No, the implication is that the training is inadequate because the moral compass of the department is so screwed up. Is because the people who come into the department are scantily trained in the academy, and then the actual training that they're told matters is the ones that is the training they get on the street, where people,
Granted.
where they're supervised by higher ranking officers, and the DOJ went on at length about how few of those supervisors there are and how inadequate the training is because of the number of bodies. That there's just not enough people training young officers coming in. And I mean, I read the entire report, and what it came back to over and over again is the kind of values that are imparted about about human life, essentially, about how to behave with the community. That's
Okay.
the big problem.
I don't ask reporters for opinions, and
Yeah.
I won't do the same to you either. But what I'll say is, are you aware of a cogent argument that the facilities that we currently have are at least reasonably adequate or could be inexpensively upgraded without increasing the footprint of those places?
Yeah, so I have heard people talk about renovation to the current facilities. And actually, there was plans for this new academy long before the DOJ report.
There were.
And that the constant reference to, what's happened since Laquan McDonald and the recommendations that have come out of the city's own committee and the DOJ, that's sort of a useful crutch for the mayor. But that the plans had been in place long ago to move the academy.
Interestingly, I myself find the idea of putting it where they want to put it objectionable on many grounds, and one of them is that it is so isolated. I mean, it is, if I'm not mistaken, where the old municipal incinerator was. So it's a really isolated place. And if you look at it on Google Maps, there's like 1 or 2 roads going into it. So the people who are there are going to be completely isolated from any community around them. And that just seems like right there, it's just a bad idea. If you're going to have an academy like this, that academy should be in a place where the cadets and the officers are constantly in and out and mingling with the roads around them and just kind of being a visible force. That is the way you begin to knit these things together instead of us and them.
Right, and the city is claiming that that's exactly what's going to happen. The West Garfield Park community has some of the biggest problems with poverty and violence in the city, and they're saying that putting the academy there is going to facilitate interaction between the community members and the police. But the counter argument to that is that you'll have, hundreds or thousands of young cops in training streaming into a community that has a lot of distrust for the police, that they're going to be working in these gleaming new facilities that are going to cost at least $95 million to put together next to a high school that has a championship basketball team, but like deteriorating physical infrastructure that doesn't have a pool, that doesn't have a racetrack. And
TIF money could be used for that instead of the cop.
It is being used. It is being used. So this is also an argument of how we're appropriating city resources. And our own Ben Joravsky, the argument that one of his big problems with this is that the city bought land in a TIF district that was privately owned, that could have been generating property tax money once it came out of the TIF district for the schools, for all the other taxing bodies. But now this is going to be city land. So it's taking city land that could generate property taxes for the city, for the county, for the schools out of circulation, when the city already has tons and tons of land that's available to it.
Great place to stop. We haven't resolved these things, but they are great conversations, and I am such an admirer of your work. I thank you for what you do, and thanks to the Reader for what it does. As you know, we're big fans of the Reader. Someday you'll have to come back and tell us about sitting and listening to every single one of Rahm Emanuel's podcasts.
Yeah, that story is online if folks are interested.
It is, and it's a great piece. It really is. Okay, thank you, Maya.
Thank you.
Maya Dukmasova from the Chicago Reader is our guest today. We'll be back again next week, and I hope you'll join us then. Okay, my name's Ken Davis. Thank you for watching Chicago Newsroom. You can watch this and all of our previous programs by going to this address any old time, and you can watch all of those shows. You can also listen to us on SoundCloud. You can listen to us on Apple iTunes. All of these are good ways of listening to the show if you're too busy to sit and watch the screen. Okay, see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.